Hi, and welcome to London Lights. I'm very pleased today and honored to have as my guest Dan Brodbeck. Dan is a London music producer, a recording engineer extraordinaire, and coordinator of Fanshawe College's Music Industry Arts program, one that's considered a leading program in the country. Dan is a 2010 Juno Award winner, and in 2019 was nominated for a Grammy for the Best Rock Album of the Year. Way to go, Dan, a Londoner.
Thanks.
That's a new one for us. We're very proud of that accomplishment by you. And that was for your work on the Cranberries' final album called In the End. Dan, welcome. It's good to have you here on London Lights.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Dan, bear with me for a minute. I'm going to give what is a rather lengthy introduction, a little unusual for the show, but I think it's interesting and necessary for me to do that. It's been a long and winding road that brought us together for this show today. Uh, I know the Cranberries started in the 1990s, and I became a big fan of the band. They were an alternative rock band, but their lead singer had this charismatic, unique quality about her that was the attention of all of the world. And actually, the band went on to have success in selling over 40 million records, maybe 50 million. But I heard on the CBC on the anniversary date 3 years ago that she had unfortunately passed away at the age of 46. She was the singer of the Cranberries. And what really caught my attention with that story was that she was living north of Peterborough for a number of years, 20 years to be exact. And she considered herself half a Canuck, in her words. Billboard declared her to be the greatest alternative female singer of all time. And I was dying to do a show about that when I found out about her Canadian connection. But this show is called London Lights. So without a London connection, there's no story on the Cranberries or on Dolores. I continued to do my research because I was just fascinated about the story. And that eventually brought me to you, Dan Brodbeck, London, Ontario. And not only were you connected with Dolores O'Riordan, but you were good friends with her. You were partners in making music, writing, and recording. And that connection took you all the way to the Junos, where you won an award, and also to the Grammy Awards in LA, California in February 2019. How on earth does a guy, Dan Brodbeck from London, Ontario, get connected with one of the biggest stars in music of our time?
Wow. You know what? Thank you very much, by the way. It's an interesting one because I worked for a long time. I've been doing this for decades, so a reputation obviously helps. And she was like, as you said, she did live part time in Canada, eventually full time. Her husband, ex-husband, was Canadian and from Toronto, and so it was a natural place. They went to Ireland, they came back, so it was a shared thing. So they did a lot of recording in Toronto when they could, and they were at a studio in Toronto, and she was working with a fella that I forget the reason why now it wasn't working out, and she said. She asked the person at the studio manager, if there was somebody else that could do what this person was doing, and that was um, basically she was experimenting with a lot of electronic music. And of course, music's made electronically, but it could be recording acoustic music. This was a bit of an experimentation into a little bit of electronic, not full electronic, but just that kind of sound. And so she would call that, like, it's sort of an 80s term, but a programmer. And that would be somebody that just sat there making beats and, clicking buttons and stuff. Not so much a producer. She was kind of co-producing. So she asked, and I got a call, and oddly, excuse me, at my studio in London when I was a partner at EMAC, yet I was to go work at a different studio. But I got the call and said, "Do you know this program Pro Tools and Reason?" And I said, "I'm an expert in both." And now I was an expert in Pro Tools. I teach it. I'd never used Reason, so I just lied. That's what you do when somebody says, "Can you?" It's a software program. How difficult can it be? To be totally honest, after this many years.
By
So
the way, this is a common theme in our show. People are
it,
getting to the next level, sometimes by promoting themselves, and they actually find a way to make it work out.
it's true, and you don't want to lie. To outwardly like that and say, I can do this. I can do this. Like maybe on the internet or something. But this was like, oh yeah, no problem. So I got the program and took a couple days, 3 days, and basically just made a song in it. And it was like, okay, this is nothing. So she said, but let's get together first. So
Mm.
to meet me, and I was like, okay, I can drive there, which she thought was insane because it was a 4-hour drive. So me and my wife got in the car and drove. Um, we were at around Oshawa. She said call around there, and she called, and we called, and her husband wasn't home, and she wasn't as familiar with driving around there, and gave us. I don't know how we got there. The directions were so bad, and we were like, where are we? It's getting home too, and we just had dinner and talked. Um, we we barely talked about music. At one point, I asked, "Do you want to hear some stuff I've done?" Or she was like, "Oh, I guess you could," but not really. So it was more, she said, well, I'm assuming you know what you're doing because you were referred to me and you've been doing this a long time. And, have you looked anything up about me? No. It's because well, it's personal for her. So
Mm.
we need to get along as people. So basically, we just hang around and ate and drank and had a good time. And at the end of the night, we drove back 4 hours again. With equally as bad directions. Even though they were given to us well, we didn't follow them well this time. And she said, well, we'll get together. It was like a week later, 5 days or something like that at the studio. And we did. And she said, and if it doesn't work out, I'll never see you again. Like just plainly, like not in a rude way, just, and I was like, okay, well, I'll
Listen,
take that. I'll take that shot. If it's about that, as opposed to what have you done, it's more about what are we going to do together.
okay.
So
Let
what
me
we ended up,
stop you there, Dan.
absolutely.
We'll come back to this in a moment, but I want to
Yeah.
get some of your background. But
Yeah.
first, before we leave Dolores in that first meeting, are you starstruck at all? I mean, here you are. I'm from London, Ontario. You're from London, Ontario. To me, when we hear about some of these rock stars, they're on another level to some extent. They almost walk on air. They're legendary. Uh, and here she is inviting you to her house. Are you starstruck at all, or not?
Oh, no, I had met some people that were, to be honest, in my world, like in the producing engineering world, absolute rock stars, like and worked with them on records, telling them what to do because they were mixing a record I produced, and that's a really weird feeling. That was more uncomfortable than this. This is just a person that sings, and once you've done this a little while, you're like, who cares? It's just a person that sings. And she was that way too. Like
I like that.
honestly, there's nothing to that really.
I like that. Okay, well, let's get back to you. How did you get your start? I know you were a graduate of South Secondary School in London. Shout out to South for all those folks you probably know. I ran into one yesterday. He was pretty proud of you.
Oh, amazing.
You started playing guitar at age 6 with your dad, Rick. But how did things start rolling for you in this business?
Um, I, boy, it's difficult. My dad owned a music store, so I was around musicians all the time. And I started recording about 14 or something like that, just myself, 4-track cassette machine kind of thing, just because I was a control freak and wanted to play all the instruments. It was really, I mean, that's a lot of people. Um, Not a lot of people had home studios then, except for those little cassette things. So for me, I was so taken with it that I started buying a little bit of equipment. Sometimes my dad would bring home stuff on the weekend to like borrow. Back when stores weren't open on Sundays, he'd bring stuff home, and I'd have all that day to mess with stuff. And then he'd bring a drum machine or a recorder back to the store or whatever. I was just so taken with it that that's just all I thought about. So before I ever went to school, I went to Oyard, by the way, not Fanshawe, and that's actually interesting because I did teach at Oyard for 1 year, but I work at Fanshawe, teach at Fanshawe, the best recording program in the country. Um, and sorry, nasty plug. It's
That's
true
okay.
though. So uh, what I ended up, I he, there was some people that would come in looking for recordings that were not maybe at the big studio level, but better than doing it themselves. So he kind of recommended me to one person at when I was he was work. I didn't work at the store then. I was just a kid, and they came over. We recorded in my parents' basement. It kind of worked at an 8-track machine. I kept getting like buying more equipment, buying more. Every time I made a little bit of money, I'd buy more. A couple of people ended up being repeat clients in my parents' basement. Tom Dunphy from the Risdales, actually. I've known Tom since way back. I don't know how old I was, 20? No, 18. 18.
Mm.
And he was my first repeat client. He didn't know that till I told him a couple of years ago. doing a gig with his wife. So it just kind of snowballed, and I ended up having a 24-track, 2-inch 24-track professional tape machine. It's still at EMAC. It doesn't get used or anything, not these days, in my parents' basement, and a console and all this stuff. And then it just got out of hand. I was working at my dad's music store during the day, and then weekends and evenings at doing recordings. And then we decided we'd build a place. So that's when we built the place on Charterhouse.
Cool. And when you talk about your dad's store, he was Music Mart on Wellington Road, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now you're a guitar player, and from what I understand, a pretty impressive one at that.
Oh,
And your
thank you.
father, of course, was a great player, so you had good genes.
Hmm.
But did you ever think about getting into a band, performing, traveling with a band, or was it always, hey, I'm focused on the recording studio?
I've always I love playing, singing live. Absolutely love it. I don't love the stuff that goes along with it. That's all. Just a lot of, the traveling was never my thing. Even in recording, all the traveling I had to do to different cities, countries, whatever. I want to sleep in my own bed at night. I'm just a suck that way. I'm not those like a road person. So that was, I realized that I didn't want to put the work into that. I could make a record every couple of weeks in some cases. Maybe let's say it's a month. And then I have 10 albums out a year. Somebody else has one a year, and if that doesn't work, maybe they're finished. I have
Yeah.
10 shots. Plus, I liked that side of it better. I absolutely love live performance, love it. But even
Cool.
the bands that I was in, we were sending out demos to record companies and stuff. I didn't really care. The back of my mind, I'm like, who cares if anybody? I don't have a huge opinion of my own work. So I would think that who would even want to sign this? This is garbage anyway, sort of thing. I just loved doing the work. So,
Well, as you say, I mean, the road can be very hard. I watched The Last Waltz with the band, and they talked about that. It just really takes a toll. And I understand you're a family man. You got your roots down hard and fast in this area,
mhm.
and I guess that's where you flourish.
Yeah, I wanted to be a combination of my favorite producers and engineers in that I grew up loving and my dad. I kind of early on found out that's not real, and you can't do that. Hard to do that. I did it, but it's hard. So I did it out of London and figured, oh, people will come to me, which is, in hindsight, sounds so stupid. They did, and I'm lucky they did, but I never really contemplated leaving Toronto, Nashville, LA, New York. I just didn't care. I hate to say it that way. I just wanted to make music that people might like, have a good time doing it, and go home to my family at night. It's a pretty, didn't ask for much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and the quality of your work showed itself, and the people did come to London. And I want to talk about that when we come back from this commercial break. Talk about the Cranberries, your work with them and with Dolores O'Riordan. It's a great story, Dan, and I look forward to speaking to you in a few minutes after this break. Stay with us, viewers. Welcome back to London Lights. I'm here with the legendary record engineer and producer, Dan Brodbeck, nominated for a Grammy 2019, a Juno Award winner. And Dan, your future is big and it's bright, but I want to go back and talk about your work with lead singer of the Cranberries, Dolores O'Riordan. As we all know, there are two great big rock bands that came out of Ireland in the recent few decades. Of course, one is U2, but the other is the Cranberries. And the Cranberries had monster hits in the 1990s with songs like Zombie, Linger, Dreams, Salvation. They played to sold out arenas. They sold millions of albums. I think you indicated 50 million. Billboard voted Dolores to be the top alternate music vocalist of all time. And you mentioned that she came to Canada, put down some roots in the Peterborough area. Tell me about her love for the area. I'm kind of curious about that. She's from Ireland. What was it about where she lived north of Peterborough on a glorified cottage on a lake, skidooing, I bet, and skiing and running? Can you tell me about that?
I think it started off which is because it was cottage. It was, well, I wouldn't personally call it a cottage. It's like three times the size of my house in here, but beautiful place to be. I mean, you wouldn't you'd almost have to not have a pulse to like where they were living. Really, and I mean, I think they could get a little isolated I think she talked about that sometimes. It was just like, okay, what are we doing here? Because you got to drive 10 minutes, 15 minutes to gotta kind of get anywhere. But
Yeah.
for the most part, they loved that. And I think a lot of it was them and the family and everybody being around. And it was just so beautiful. And it was more about that. Um, Loved Canada, loved Canadian people. To obviously toured the world. So to love that country, I mean, it's a great place to live. So, and especially when you're living where she lived and how she lived, etc. You know,
Well, it says a lot. And there are many things about Canada that we take for granted. And we find people coming from Hollywood and all over the world to enjoy our cottage country. It's just paradise up there. So she decides to take a break from the Cranberries. They're on hiatus for a while. And in 2003, she's looking at doing a solo album. And she ends up working with you, correct?
yes,
Does she come to London to do some of that work on the first solo album?
no, not. I did a little bit in London,
Okay.
only a few minor things, but I like because she didn't need to be there for that. Some guitar overdubs, some stuff, but no, that wasn't didn't happen until the second solo record. The first solo record wasn't even necessarily a record either. It was just I just want to do some stuff. The focus actually was possibly getting songs and soundtracks. So she had some ins with that. She's a very kind of voice that really lends itself to sitting like for licensing, sitting behind visuals. It's Dreams has been licensed over 300 times,
Wow.
separate licenses. So it's just one of those songs, and she has that kind of voice. So very lucky. It just it puts you in a mood. It's just not, and it's not generic in any way. So um, yeah, it wasn't really a record. That's what's been good about her stuff. The second record was definitely this is what we're doing, but the first one was, oh, we must have done 20 songs. Oh,
Well,
probably more.
her voice is something else, Dan. And I mean, I know you appreciate that as well.
Oh yeah.
It's got that Irish accent to it. She has a bit of a yodel in her voice. She can do these things with her voice that I've never heard from any other artist. And as I listened to some Cranberry songs as I prepared for our interview, I was just taken by her so much. I mean, and her charisma. And she's a beautiful woman. There's a photo of the two of you together, and I've got to tell you, you must have a very secure and confident wife to allow you to be working with Dolores and spending time with her, because she's a gorgeous lady. I know your wife is too. I saw a photo of her, and she's very supportive of what you do.
You'd have to be. This is not. In fact, I even think I say it in my Juno acceptance speech. This is not a family-friendly business
Yeah.
at all, and it's not really ever been about that. You can make that work, by the way, but that's not the focus. The focus is you're a product. You're
Yeah.
going to keep cranking this stuff out, and if you can't do that while you're also having a family, then don't have a family. I think that's kind of the way. So a lot of people get divorced and break up and that kind of stuff. And I mean, obviously, this was never easy. But you know, when with the right person, you can make it through anything, I guess.
Yeah. Well, talk about the second solo album then, No Baggage. You started working with her in 2008, and you won a Juno for that album in 2010, correct?
Yes, yeah, for recording engineer of the year. Yeah,
Congratulations. That's impressive.
thank
Now,
you.
did Dolores have to come to London for any of that work?
Yes, that whole record was done in London at EMAX Studios, where I was a part owner at the time. In fact, that was the last thing I ever did there. Um, it was. Um, we had. I hate to say it this way. We had to do it there. She loved it, by the way. That wasn't a bad thing. She ended up loving the studio after so long of me telling her to come here. And you don't want to bug somebody. It's her record. So, but my father got diagnosed with a brain tumor in January of 2008. So early second or something like that. So she wasn't going to stop doing the record, and she also wasn't going to do it with somebody else. So we decided we were going to do it in London. So every day I recorded at the studio, and then at the night I went to the hospital the next day for this was a few months.
Wow.
So, but she did love it. She came and she was only there for maximum a week. I think only 5 days because she needed to, I was there for months, but she only needed to come in to sing. So, and then she came in to check in on the drums and bass as they were going down. But when it came to the other stuff, she was fine because we were basically perfecting or adding or making our demos into the real thing. I'd go to her house, we'd make these demos. We can take those and individually start replacing the demo material on those you don't have to record them from scratch again like you used to have to do with tape. So I can very easily pop in, oh, let's do drums and bass. I'll replace my guitars. In some cases, she was like, no, I like what you did. And it was literally like a fake plug-in amp in the computer at her house when it was the very first time I ever played it. Not wrote it, played it. Like I just picked my guitar up and started playing. She liked it. That's the single, The Journey on that record's like that.
Oh, wow.
So it's all organic for her too, which is really, really cool. So if this was the way we had to do it, this is the way it was supposed to happen. That's the way she would think about it.
That's very cool. Well, let me talk about this from a fan perspective because, I'm downtown London all the time. I work downtown. And the thought that maybe Dolores O'Riordan walked by me one day and I didn't know who she was, I'm just like, oh, how did I miss out on this? So tell me about that. She's here. She's working for about a week. I think you told me she stayed on a hotel on Richmond Row. And is she shopping? Is she going out? Is she going to restaurants? Do you go with her? How does that all happen?
I think we only went out, actually, the time when she came here for the recording, we didn't go out at all. She came back another time when we did a project with her and the bass player, Andy Rourke from the Smiths, and we all went out for dinner at Bertoldi's at that time. But that's because it was across the street from the Station Park, and the last time she stayed there was Station Park, and that's where she knew it and she liked it, so we were going to go there. She thought she was here, like, I think they came in, oh, I forget when they came, but she just thought that Richmond Row was crazy. But the reason it was crazy was because of all the students. It's like, no, that's not London. She's like, London's insane. These people are mad. And I'm like, no, that's just like that because you're literally across the street from Barney's, are you not? I think. So when you're looking at that every night, you're like, these people are insane. But no, that's just that block. Loved it. Went to the nail salon and got massages and that kind of stuff all around London. People started to know her a little. It was only a week she was here, but she was like the nail people, like the people that that place really liked her. And jogging around the Western Campus, she always did that, like just adventurous. Just took off for 4 or 5 hours at a time, kind of thing. That's when she realized I don't really need to go to the studio. They've got this. So, but then from that point, she just loved coming back because she had a good time. It was a really cool place, and we put her in a place where we thought she'd like it and she was comfortable with too. So
Oh, cool. So then the Cranberries get back together for a final album. You do some work on that. Next thing I know, you're getting a call. Dan, you have been nominated for a Grammy. Tell me about that experience.
well, first of all, the record, it's really weird because I never sat with that band ever in the studio. So all that work is me and her. So we were just making music again. So there's a collection of songs that weren't used, and they just had no destination yet. We were finishing them, and we didn't work together for a few years. And she had gotten back in touch with me. We talked about one of the songs I wrote for her and stuff like that, and then using it and the song splits and our rights and all that kind of stuff. Well, so they were going to make the record and just keep my stuff. They did that for 3 records. I'm involved in 3 Cranberries records, and I've never sat in the studio with the band. So they just used a lot of my stuff, my recording, my engineering, the production of the vocals, my guitar playing, keyboard parts. They just kept it. So that record I had a large involvement in. They took my stuff. She had passed away. They just added them on top.
Wow.
That's how the record was made.
And so you get the call, you go to LA, I understand, and you're sitting there with all the greats. And for the album of the year, we're not just talking about tweaking some knobs here. You were involved in writing and helping with some of the musical parts on those songs. Must have been a great thrill.
Oh, it absolutely was. I should just go on Twitter and claim I actually won. Sorry. It, it, uh, it it's weird because it's a team award, so it's the Cranberries, but the engineers, producers, and stuff. If you're on 50% or more involvement, you would be winning that award. So we lost, if you want to call it, to Cage the Elephant, who are a great band. So, and that was the one that everybody was like, if we're going to lose to somebody, I bet you it's going to be them. And it was.
Dan, we're running out of time. Today, sadly, is the anniversary of the death of Dolores. 3 years ago, I think now.
Yes.
One of the great tragedies in modern rock. To have her lose her life at age 46, very sad. You must have taken that hard.
Absolutely. I was actually sitting in the exact same office that I was at Fanshawe when I found out that I won or was nominated for the Grammy. I got an email, talked to her brother and said, is she okay? And then he said, "Can I call you?" And he called me and said she had passed away, which is not what I expected. We had talked the day before, so it was very strange, obviously. So yeah,
Well,
it was just a surreal, weird. Those things don't feel real, kind of.
yeah, yeah. It must have been a tough time for you, and I hope you've been able to cope with that. And sounds like you've moved on to bigger things as well, and you're not stopping. Nothing's going to hold you back. And before we go, can you tell me what we're up to or what you're up to these days?
Well, literally right now, it's basically running the program at Fanshot in the time we're in is obviously has its challenges. It's working well, but it's a big challenge. So most of the music work I'm doing, obviously, because lockdowns happen and stuff, is mixing, which I do a lot of, and I'm doing that in my own home studio right here. So a lot of that, a little bit more working with local bands, which I hadn't done in years. So when I was working with Dolores and record companies and that kind of stuff. So that's neat, but just involved in the development of some younger talent and mixing from people across the continent really who just send me stuff and I mix it and send it back. So lots of that.
Dan Brodbeck, uh, we are proud of you as somebody that has been nominated for a Grammy for the best album of the year. You've won Junos. You're continuing your work with the students at the Fanshawe Musical Arts Program, and I'm sure you're a big inspiration to all of them, as all of us here in London. So, Dan, thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy. Thank you for being with me today on London Lights. There are going to be more episodes coming up, but this is going to be one that I'm going to be thinking about for a while.